We've taken a giant leap forward in history. After finishing with the incredible architecture of Tenochtitlan in the hands of the Mexica, due to time restraints, we are completely skipping over several hundred years of colonial rule in Latin America. In a way, it's a bit of a tragedy to skip it. And on the other hand, I really want to focus on the way that these nations, colonized by Spain, overthrew their colonizers and began to build new modern nation states. So we're starting in Mexico, and we're looking at the way that art and architecture, primarily muralism, the Mexican muralists, first and foremost for this lecture, went hand in hand with the remaking of that nation. Their work is pivotal, it's exciting. I can't wait to show it to you. So here we are in Mexico. Just a little background on what's happening and what our timeline is. We're in 1910, and at this time, more than 75% of all of Mexico's available farmland belonged to less than 1% of the population. Something quite familiar to us today, but not in terms of farmland, certainly in terms of wealth, which was the same story back then. Land equaled wealth. 1910, we are just at the end of a long-lasting dictatorship by a man named Porfirio Diaz. And in 1910, he has just authorized land seizures from both indigenous communal farmers and small farmers who didn't have the money or the clout to resist. Diaz's vision was for an industrial, highly productive Mexico. He wanted to bring Mexico out of its colonial past into a very modern European sort of nation state. And he did this at the hands of those who were least able to fight back. So by 1910, the now landless have become completely restless, just as those right below the dictatorship started getting a little bit jealous of Porfirio Diaz's power. So, right at this period, the dictator finally announced that he would hold elections and let people choose a leader for themselves. It was a bit of a farce, this election. The opposition candidate was jailed, and Diaz handpicked the man who was supposed to succeed him. In response, the people of Mexico, for a variety of different reasons, land dispossession, hunger, joblessness, and then for those at the top, just greed, wanting that wealth and power for themselves. All of these factors came together to ignite the Mexican Revolution. So let's take a minute to look at Diaz on the right and the imagery that was created around Mexico's centenary celebration. It was supposed to be the celebration of 100 years out from under colonial boots, celebrating 100 years of Mexico as its own independent nation after overthrowing Spain. Just take a look at what's in front of us. So on the right, you have Diaz in full regalia. Take a minute to write down and post into Slack what this regalia signals for you. What does it look like? Whose image is he trying to project and mirror? Where in the world would you position this sort of clothing, this sort of look? So the things that stand out, right? We have these very regal symbols, instantly recognizable as the symbols of many, many European leaders. Diaz is trying to put on the costume, put on the regalia of a European figurehead. And in particular, Diaz and his group of científicos, of technocrats and scientists that surrounded him, all of them were looking to France. They wanted to emulate and to become something of a mirror image of France. And you can see that in his clothing. Diaz commissioned a series of monuments, in fact, a whole new roadway, and we've talked about this several times, about the way that power sometimes takes shape in urban planning. And in this case, Diaz wanted to move the center of tradition, of power, away from the historic Zocalo, the downtown, the historical center of government. He wanted to move things out into a new area, and he created a new avenue to do this. This monument that we're looking at is one of those commission pieces. So again, take some time to jot down what you see. What does it look like? Where's its inspiration coming from? And if I hadn't told you this was in Mexico City, where else might you think it stood? It clearly, again, models itself after so many European triumphal statues of the same type. The same mode is being played out here, with that golden, triumphant, almost winged Nike, the symbol of victory at the top. She is holding a wreath, a laurel wreath of independence, but also it gives you an idea of a crowning in some way. All of these things could so easily be plopped down in the middle of Paris. So easily be plopped down in the middle of Brussels, of so many different spots throughout Europe. There's very little here that speaks to Mexico itself. The Palace of Fine Arts was originally begun under Diaz, and over time, as Diaz began to lose his grip, as he said, "I'll step down from power," as he was then forcibly removed through the will of the revolutionaries, the architecture of the building changes from bottom to top. The bottom right, we have all of these very classical columns. It's made out of marble. The marble was imported from Europe. But as you get closer to the top, something new happens. There are Art Deco features on the very upper layer, the thing right below that sort of beautiful glowing dome. I always think of this as sort of a beautiful iced cupcake, this building. And so on the top you have this beautiful icing, this yellow moving into burned orange and red, the leaves that we see outside in the fall. It's emulating each of those things. And then on the top, we have that very strong symbol that we discussed when looking at the Mexica. We have the eagle perched with a snake in its mouth. And we can see the difference from the bottom that is just European to its core to the top that is trying to say something, that is making a strong statement about the real founding of Mexico, about the real cultural origins. Not French, not European, but Mexica and Toltec and so many of the other cultures that we've studied up till now are being looked back on as the origins that they were. Diaz, of course, before he is removed, before he steps down, before the revolution takes place, he and his followers, in this case, one of the presidents he appointed to succeed him, are still building in this sort of bizarre combination of European influence, Spanish colonial influence, and we see that here in particular at the Hacienda Chapingo. This building would become a key site for education after the revolution. Prior to the revolution, it was a mansion designed to put Diaz's stamp, to put the Cientifico's stamp out on the countryside, to show the power and dominion of Diaz's rule, not only in the city, but out in the land itself. And in this case, right on the land under which Tenochtitlan and Lake Texcoco had existed prior. So who are the revolutionaries? You've heard their names: Emiliano Zapata, Pancho Villa. Together, these very different men from different parts of the country with different aims fought against the landowners, those who had been given land inappropriately, land taken out from under the indigenous people of the region. And they also fought against the government and its army. They led thousands and thousands of people, thousands and thousands of landless, indigenous, just fed up, hungry, angry, frustrated, disenfranchised people into what was now a full-fledged civil war that we now know as the Mexican Revolution. There's so much richness and depth in that history, in that story. We don't have time for it, but we'll see it in heightened detail through the work of the Mexican muralists. You'll see that in the next section.